Hey folks, good morning and happy Friday. Welcome to your January 3rd edition of Forecasting Space with me, your host, Chase Wilson. Sorry for the delay of the last couple of shows. We've had some very active weather around here, and first and foremost, I'm a meteorologist, so I've been very busy with that sort of stuff. But as we've headed over the last few days, it's been pretty good. We're calming down a little bit, so we can finally take a look at what's going on in space news over the next week and beyond. And I'll start with the launches because the next 7 days are going to be very, very interesting here in the continental United States. The next couple of days are pretty standard affair. We have a few Falcon 9 launches. First things first, the Rhea 4 NGS is a national communications satellite coming out of the UAE over there in the Middle East. This is going to geostationary orbit and is going to be landing on a shortfall of Gravitas, their drone ship out there off the coast. This is going to be at 7:27 p.m. pending the weather here through today. That's 7:27 p.m. Central Time. Now, as we head into tomorrow, nothing going on, right? So our next launch is Sunday. Right now, we're going to have that at 11:10 a.m. This is a pretty standard launch, Starlink Group 6-71. We see a lot of these Starlink launches, pretty much the standard coming out of the continental United States. But after this, things get interesting because on Monday at midnight, we have the Blue Ring Pathfinder, the maiden flight of the New Glenn rocket by Blue Origin. Now, I'm particularly excited about this one for a couple of reasons, not the least of which being, as a resident of Huntsville myself, I've been hearing for months now the testing of these rocket engines. It has 7 BE-4 engines on the bottom of it, boosting it into orbit. And sure enough, boy, Huntsville is ground zero for the testing of these. You hear this deep rumble in the evening, rattles your windows. And I'll tell you what, that is just a great sound to hear. I love living in the Rocket City, so it's going to be great to see all this effort finally pay off there. And I think Falcon Heavy needs a nice competitor, and I think this is definitely a viable one because this thing can launch a lot into orbit. And just like the Falcon series, which kind of paved the way for reusability, this will be reusable. It's going to be landing on LPV-1, ideally, right? This is the first launch, so excitement guaranteed, I think is the best way to put it. Success, maybe. Excitement, definitely. That really is the best way to put it. So again, that's Monday at midnight. Be sure to tune in for that. If you're a fan of Blue Origin, this is definitely going to be an interesting one. Next up after that, Starlink Group 12-11. This is going to be Monday as well at 10:19 a.m., so it's going to be a daytime launch, pending weather, of course. And then after this, nothing for the next 7 days. But that being said, Friday, it's January 10th, we might see Starship Flight 7 take off. Now, this is exciting too because we've seen the last 6. This is really something to watch because this is the most incredible rocket really that's ever existed, right? 2 stages of reusable pure rocket power. This thing is bigger than the Saturn V and loft more into orbit than the Saturn V. And as we saw in the last launch, the bottom stage is caught in those arms. The second stage burns through the atmosphere with its heat shield facing down, does that flip. If all things go together and come together right, this is going to be another spectacular launch, right? This is just one of the most incredible things. And I know I sound like a little bit of a fanboy, but how can you not be with systems like this? So we'll have to watch this. Now, the date is, of course, kind of tentative, right? These things do change. Weather and other permissions need to be granted. So don't take that for granted. But right now, looks like January 10th is the targeted date. That's probably going to be in the early evening, probably around 4 p.m. So let's keep a very close eye on Boca Chica here as we head over the next 7 to 8 days. That concludes our launches for the next 7 days. Let's see what's going on in the world of space as far as news is concerned. What a year it's been for space, especially on the Florida Space Coast there at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. 93 launches out of the 2024 period there. That is incredible. That is definitely the highest on the coast in its history. Just last year, 2023, we had something like 74 launches. So we're definitely seeing that cadence increase, largely due to SpaceX. SpaceX actually completed 134 commercial and government missions in 2024, 62 from the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station and 26 from Kennedy Space Center, and the rest were at Vandenberg. So that accounts for 88 launches of the 93 out there on the coast. So clearly there's a winner here in this respect. But we're also starting to see, as you saw there earlier in the launch cadences coming up, Blue Origin creeping in here into the market. We're starting to see even Rocket Labs out on the East Coast in Virginia creep up with their smaller rockets. So a lot of stuff's happening really, really quickly. And I think as we head into 2025, especially with Jared Isaacman coming up as the new NASA administrator, this is going to be pretty promising, right? Now, People say this and that about politics, and we're not going to get into that on this show, but what we can say is this, at least my personal opinion, is that Jared Isaacman, pretty good pick. I mean, this guy has been to space. This guy has done spacewalks. This guy is embedded deep within the rocket industry, and I think this is the type of person that'll probably help accelerate this cadence, right? So we have a lot to look forward to, at least in the space sector, over the next few years, really over the next couple of weeks as Inauguration Day is coming up. So this is actually pretty exciting in this respect. 2025 promises to continue that acceleration, right? SpaceX has set some lofty goals, right, for lack of a better term, in terms of their launch cadence. So let's see if that pans out. And of course, if you watch the show for any amount of time, you'll know that they're pretty much the lead-in for the launches, right? Every time I'm talking about Starlink Group 20,000-50,000, right? They're always launching something either out of Vandenberg or out of the Space Coast in Florida. So this is going to be exciting. I know I sound like a broken record, but it never gets old. Even as this becomes more routine, even as we see these boosters landing for the 15th, 20th, 25th time, it always amazes me that what we can do is right there at our fingertips, that anyone can watch this sort of thing. So here's hoping that 2025 is going to be a good one for space. Now let's take a look at a photo of the week, and this one is really special to me. I'll give you one hint. It has rings, it's a planet in our solar system, and it rhymes with battery. Okay, in fairness, maybe that was more than one hint, and maybe it was a little obvious. Sure enough, we're talking about Saturn. This is, again, one of my favorite planets. I know it's a little cliche, but I mean, come on, look at that. Can you really blame me? This is from the James Webb Space Telescope, one of the most recent launches of one of our super telescopes, if you will, and look at those rings stand out. Now again, James Webb is an infrared, so we're not looking at visible light here. We're looking at those deeper shades of reds that we would see if we had infrared vision, but of course we don't. So this is much larger wavelengths of light. Really kind of shows heat, right? So you see those rings really have a lot of latent heat in them, largely due to the fact they're always bumping into each other, they reflect more, things like this, as opposed to the gaseous atmosphere of Saturn, because Saturn is a gas giant. We need to keep this in mind, and honestly, I think James Webb is one of the best things we could have to really make this stand out, right? I mean, obviously in visible light, Saturn looks incredible. In fact, through pretty much any amateur telescope, point it up on a nice clear night and you can see the rings yourself, but this really just takes it to the next level. And by the way, it's worth keeping in mind, Saturn is not the only planet with rings. Jupiter has rings, Uranus has rings. You know, pretty much all the gas giants do to some extent or another, but Saturn is just the most spectacular. And honestly, in this photo too, if you look there on the left, those are a few of its moons as well. Titan included in that has a very thick atmosphere. In fact, as thick as Earth's, and it has lakes on it. Yeah, lakes, liquid lakes of methane. Not something you want to swim in. It's about negative 200 degrees there, but lakes nonetheless, which is kind of incredible in its own right. But honestly, like I said, I think Saturn just got to steal the show in this one. That is truly one of my favorite photos that James Webb has taken. Well, that concludes this episode of Forecasting Space. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back with you next Thursday for more, and here's hoping that these Blue Origin launches, these Falcon launches, go well for the next 7 days. Thanks for joining me. I'll talk to you next week.